Did you ever get fined for a tree that didn't ask to be planted, didn't ask to grow, and sure as hell didn't ask to start a war? Because I have. I hadn't even closed the truck door when I heard it. This sharp, banshee-level screech cutting through lake air like someone was murdering a saxophone. That's how I met Brenda Covington. She was stomping toward me in a pair of white wedges like they were combat boots, wielding a clipboard with the kind of confidence people usually reserve for search warrants. "Section 4.7 violation," she barked, jabbing toward the tree in my front yard like it had insulted her ancestors. "That red maple needs to come down. $500, 0 cents fine, or we begin seizure proceedings." That's a quote. I hadn't even figured out which drawer I put the forks in yet, and this woman was quoting bylaws like she was hosting a legal podcast. Ever been threatened with eviction over a tree? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this story spirals faster than tonight's breaking news. That maple, it was just the spark. She didn't know yet, but I wasn't some clueless newcomer. I knew every inch of this land, including the legal fact that I didn't just own the cabin. I should have realized then that Brenda wasn't just a neighbor. She was a walking declaration of petty war, dressed like a Sunday school teacher and armed with rules she'd probably written herself. I introduced myself, Graham Landry, new guy, friendly handshake, the whole bit, but she ignored it like it was a clearance sticker. "You agreed to the bylaws when you bought the place," she said, clutching her clipboard like it was a holy relic. I told her I'd read every document before signing. She smirked. "Maybe you missed the fine print." "Lady, I used to design bridges. You think I miss fine print? One missed detail in my world and somebody's Chevy ends up in a river." I sipped my coffee slowly, nodded politely, and mentally marked her as a problem with bangs and a badge. What bothered me wasn't just the ridiculousness of the complaint, it was the certainty in her tone, like she'd been waiting for someone to move in just so she could pounce. The cabin, by the way, was perfect. A little two-bedroom A-frame nestled just far enough from the lake to hear frogs at night, but close enough to throw a rock into the water. That red maple? Tall, healthy, and throwing shade in all the right places. Unlike Brenda, who threw hers indiscriminately. That afternoon, I laid out my purchase documents on the kitchen table like I was preparing for a court case. Nothing. No tree rules, no oak obsession, just boilerplate stuff about noise levels and trash bins. I tried to find the HOA bylaws online. Nothing came up. Eventually, Brenda emailed me a PDF that looked like it was formatted by a bored teenager on a flip phone. No letterhead, no signatures, inconsistent fonts. Section 4.7 was highlighted like it was gospel, but I couldn't find anything that made it legally binding. That's when I started to feel something different. Not just annoyance, but curiosity, like someone handed me a riddle in passive-aggressive stationery. Next morning, I walked the property line with my phone, documenting everything. That's when I met Hank Dobson, a flannel-wearing retiree with a handshake like a bench vice. "Brenda already on you about that tree?" he asked with a chuckle. I nodded. He shook his head. "She's been making up rules since the day she got that title. Nobody cared about trees till she started quoting bylaws like bedtime stories." Hank leaned against a birch, voice dropping. "Word is she's been working with a developer. Gets a finder's fee for every property she helps flip. Your cabin? Prime view. They've been eyeing it for years." I stared at the lake, then back at him. "You're saying this is about money?" He shrugged. "Ain't it always?" That's when it clicked. She didn't care about that maple. She cared that I had something she wanted, and she figured she could scare me off with paperwork and fines before I figured it out. But Brenda didn't know who she was dealing with. She thought I was some retiree with soft hands and softer principles. What she didn't know is that I've stood in freezing wind on top of steel beams 20 stories up, arguing with inspectors tougher than her by a mile, and unlike her, I believe in building things that last. Truth included. That tree wasn't a violation, it was a line in the dirt. And Brenda, she'd just declared war without realizing she'd picked a fight with the guy who owned the whole damn shoreline. I didn't just buy a cabin. I bought the east bank, the dock, and a slice of land that went deeper than her rule book ever did. She saw a tree. I saw the first crack in a fake empire held together by inkjet bylaws and brittle control, and I hadn't even started fighting back yet. The lights went out the next afternoon, just like that. No storm, no warning, no blown fuse. The fridge clicked off mid-hum, my laptop dropped into battery mode, and while I was checking the breakers, I noticed every other cabin on the lake still humming along like nothing happened. Porch lights on, ceiling fans spinning, lawnmowers roaring. Mine? Dead quiet. 10 minutes later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Electrical maintenance required on your line. Service will resume after inspection. Willow Meadow, HOA management. The HOA doesn't own the grid. I knew that. They don't have access to the meters, and yet, somehow, only my power had gone dark. That was the first time I said it out loud. This is a setup, and the minute it came out of my mouth, I knew I was right. Brenda had taken her tree tantrum and upgraded to infrastructure warfare. Lucky for me, I'm the type of guy who packs like he's planning for the apocalypse, not a quiet lakeside retirement. I had a portable generator in the shed, one of those just-in-case purchases that now felt more like prophecy. I fired it up, fed a few extension cords through the back window, and kept my essentials alive. Coffee maker, fridge, router. Triage. Priorities. That night, I spotted Brenda standing on the community dock, phone in hand, watching my cabin like she was casing it for a heist. She turned away fast when I caught her stare, tripping over a loose board and nearly toppling into the lake. Would have made a great viral clip if it'd been faster with my camera. Still, I wasn't laughing. This wasn't just some power-hungry neighbor getting high off enforcement. This was targeted, it was methodical, it was personal. And if she thought I'd pack up and leave over a flickering light bulb, she'd seriously misread the wiring. By the next morning, things had gone from HOA drama to full-on high school Cold War. Neighbors who'd waved just days before now crossed the street when they saw me coming. At the community mailboxes, one woman physically flinched when I said good morning. At the local market, conversations evaporated when I walked in. It felt like I'd wandered into a cult meeting halfway through a sermon. Hank Dobson spotted me by the checkout and made a subtle motion with his eyes. Meet me out back. We circled around the dumpster like we were about to swap state secrets. She called an emergency meeting last night. He whispered. Only her little inner circle got the invite. Showed pictures of your place. Told them you're working for some resort across the lake. Said you're here to undermine property values and tank the community. I stared at him. That's insane. He just shrugged. Welcome to Brenda's brain. When people can't beat you with logic, they beat you with gossip. And Brenda was slinging it like cheap mulch. And then, as if this whole thing needed a cherry on top, Hank gave me the backstory. Brenda Covington, before her reign as Queen HOA, tried her hand at becoming an online gardening influencer. The garden fang, he said, shaking his head like someone recalling a bad dream, used to make videos on how to revitalize flower beds. Except half her tips killed the plants, got roasted in the comments, and rage quit YouTube after someone called her a chlorophyll terrorist. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it explained so much. Brenda wasn't just power-hungry, she was bruised. Someone who'd failed in public and decided she'd never let anyone challenge her again, even if it meant rewriting the rules of tree ownership. And now she was turning an entire neighborhood into a chessboard where I was the rogue knight messing up her perfect game. She didn't want order, she wanted obedience. And I'd given her neither. That meant war, HOA style. Back home, I started collecting everything: screenshots, emails, pictures, timestamps, phone records. I created a digital folder labeled Brenda the Brave and filled it with every move she made. The doctored bylaws PDF, the fake power outage notice, the emergency assessment fee they'd tried to slide under my door that same evening. All of it. One page after another, building a paper trail so long it could wrap around the leg. I'd seen this kind of abuse before. Power wrapped in procedure, control dressed up as compliance. But here's the thing about people like Brenda. They always think the rules are on their side because they wrote them. What they forget is that real rules, the ones built on law, not ego, can't be faked with formatting. I wasn't just going to endure this. I was going to expose it. She thought this was a tree dispute. She didn't realize I was already mapping out the fault lines beneath her entire kingdom, and if she kept pushing, she was going to find out just how fast a clipboard can snap in half. When you've got neighbors whispering behind your back, power flickering off like it's afraid of confrontation, and a woman with a clipboard acting like she's got more authority than the IRS, there's only one thing to do: follow the paper. So I headed to the county records office, expecting maybe a long afternoon and a few dusty binders. What I found? A mess. Not just a mess, an absence. The HOA Brenda loved to quote like gospel, nowhere to be found in the official filings. No articles of incorporation, no nonprofit registry, not even a valid tax ID. I double-checked everything 3 times. It was like someone had drawn a castle on a fogged-up mirror. Looked real until you wiped it down. I walked out of that building carrying more questions than answers, but one thing was starting to settle in. The rules she'd been weaponizing might not even exist. That same day, I got a text from an unknown number. Meet at Lakefront Coffee, ask for Claire, 11 a.m. Sounded like a spy novel, and honestly, it felt about right. I showed up the next morning, ordered a black coffee, and a few minutes later, a woman in a stiff navy blazer slid into the seat across from me. Claire Bennett. Late 20s. Over-caffeinated energy and the look of someone who'd been carrying secrets heavier than her laptop. She worked at the local branch where the HOA kept its funds, and let's just say curiosity had finally outweighed fear. "I can't print anything without triggering alerts," she whispered. But I wrote down the dates and amounts. Brenda's been moving money into her personal account. Small transfers, just under the reporting limits, but they add up. She slid a folded slip of paper across the table like it was a poker chip. "This never happened," she said, then left before her latte cooled. I opened the note and nearly choked on my coffee. Brenda had siphoned over 20 grand in the last 6 months, allegedly for community improvement assessments. Only problem was, there were no improvements, unless you count that "Welcome to Willow Meadow" sign she had installed, which looked like it was designed by a middle school art club during a power outage. I went home and added Claire's info to the folder, now officially renamed Brenda Files. I sat back in my chair, staring out at the lake, wondering how many more people she'd conned under the banner of beautification. The irony? She'd been trying to get me out over a tree, while she was quietly planting the seeds of financial fraud. That maple in my yard might have been illegal in her fake handbook, but at least it didn't have a checking account. That afternoon, I took a walk around the property to clear my head, and that's when I noticed it. Someone had walked through my backyard. Fresh boot prints in the damp dirt. Not mine, not Hank's. Too small, too clean. They stopped near the utility box, then disappeared back toward the road. I checked my security cam. Nothing. It had been disconnected. Just unplugged. No animal, no weather, just a wire hanging like a half-told lie. A few hours later, I got an email from another anonymous account. "You're being watched. Back off or get buried in paperwork." Classy. Threats by Gmail. But that's when I knew Brenda was sweating. The truth doesn't hide cameras or send anonymous emails. Lies do. And her web was starting to unravel faster than a bargain store garden hose in July. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon and a pen in hand, sketching out a plan. The goal wasn't just to survive her nonsense anymore, it was to expose it. Brenda had power because people believed she had power. But once you pull back the curtain and show the wizards just a woman with bad Wi-Fi and worse ethics, the spell breaks, and I was almost there. A fake HOA, fake bylaws, real money stolen, and now real people ready to talk. Claire had opened a crack in the dam, the next move was mine, and if Brenda thought cutting my power was bold, wait till she saw what happens when the lights come back on, right in the middle of her shadow games. The community boathouse smelled like mildew and tension, both clinging to the walls like wallpaper nobody wanted to admit was peeling. I hadn't been officially invited, of course. Brenda's inner circle made sure I was left off the HOA email chain, which I was pretty sure was just her and her cousin Marlene forwarding bad PDFs to each other. But thanks to Hank, I knew about the emergency meeting and I knew why it had suddenly appeared on the calendar. They were about to vote on seizing my property. I walked in, wearing my cleanest flannel and calmest face, and took a seat in the back like I was there to hear a sermon I didn't believe in. Brenda nearly dropped her gavel. Her eyes went wide, her face tightened, and that fake church lady smile tried to form, but cracked halfway through. She tried to recover. "Mr. Landry, this meeting is for HOA members in good standing," she sniffed, gripping the gavel like it doubled as a weapon. "Given your ongoing violations, we may need to ask you to step outside." I smiled. "Actually, I'm a property owner, and by county law, I'm entitled to observe any meeting affecting my parcel." A few heads turned. Claire, seated near the front, gave the tiniest nod. Brenda cleared her throat and fumbled for her notes. She launched into the agenda, fast-talking her way through budget numbers no one could verify and improvement projects no one had seen. Then she reached it. Lot 42, non-compliance. That was me. She clicked a remote. A grainy photo of my perfectly intact electrical box popped up on the screen. "Evidence of infrastructure tampering," she declared, "resulting in an emergency assessment to protect the community grid." I raised my hand slowly. "Quick question, who took this photo?" Brenda froze, like someone had unplugged her brain mid-lumber. She stammered something about a compliance contractor, but before she could finish, I stood up and walked to the front. "Mind if I show something?" I asked, already plugging in my USB. Since we're presenting evidence, I brought some of my own. I clicked play. The room watched as the video displayed a man in a reflective vest, not fixing anything, but clearly yanking wires from my meter box, snapping a photo, then casually walking away. The timestamp matched the photo Brenda had just used. Murmurs spread like spilled coffee. "That's your contractor?" I asked. "Because I don't think he was fixing anything. I think he was staging a scene." Brenda lunged for the remote. "This is doctored," she shouted, her voice going up an octave like it had just hit puberty. "This is a smear campaign." Her hands shook, her hair frizzed, her authority, it was unraveling like a cheap ribbon on a clearance wreath. Then Claire stood. Her voice cracked at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I need to say something," she said. "Last month, Brenda asked me to backdate an HOA financial record to justify a late withdrawal. When I hesitated, she implied that my mortgage might be reviewed for community fit." Audible gasps. Then someone else spoke up. "She told me my mailbox color violated regulation right after I voted no on the landscaping contract." Another voice chimed in. "She fined me for a non-compliant fence, but the rule didn't exist until a week later." And just like that, the fear started to melt into fury. Brenda's face contorted between panic and martyrdom. "Everything I've done," she said, "was to protect the beauty and order of Willow Meadow. But beauty isn't built on fake rules, and order isn't the same as control." People were seeing it now. All of it. I pulled up one last slide, a screenshot of the county record system showing no legal registration of any HOA under the name Brenda used, no authority, no charter, no real enforcement power, just one woman with a printer and a god complex. "The louder she bangs that gavel," I said, "the clearer it becomes that she never had a courtroom." The room went quiet. Then someone started clapping, then another. Brenda stood, frozen, her gavel now limp in her hand, like she wasn't sure whether to drop it or throw it. But her kingdom had already cracked, right there on the floor of a boathouse lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs and fueled by too many years of silence. What came next wasn't just about my tree or my power. It was about the residents finally realizing they weren't subjects. They were neighbors. And we'd all just seen the crown fall off the queen. Brenda must have sensed the walls were closing in, because within 24 hours of the boathouse blow-up, she fired off an emergency HOA meeting notice marked mandatory. This one had a new twist. It wasn't at the boathouse. It was at the community legal hall, which was really just the back room of the real estate office her cousin used to lease. And seated next to Brenda at the folding table was a man in an ill-fitting navy suit who looked like he got his JD from a cereal bowl. "Legal counsel," she announced with theatrical flair, "here to advise us on urgent action regarding property violations." Translation: a hired mouthpiece to legitimize whatever stunt she was about to pull. I took a seat near the back, my briefcase on my lap, and waited, because I hadn't just come to listen, I'd come to end it. The fake lawyer, no business card, no last name, no real credibility, cleared his throat and read from a crumpled paper. "Due to repeated disruptions caused by the occupant of Lot 42, he began, "we recommend immediate property seizure under Bylaw 7.3c, Emergency Enforcement Protocol." My eyebrows nearly hit my hairline. Emergency protocol. This wasn't a pandemic. This was a woman mad about a tree and a man who wouldn't bend. The room shifted uncomfortably. I stood up slowly. "Before anyone votes on anything," I said, "you might want to know who actually owns the land you're trying to seize." I stepped to the front, opened my briefcase, and laid out the documents like a magician revealing a long-held trick. These are certified county records tracing ownership of the lakefront, dock, roads, and common access points, all the way back to my grandfather, Ernest Landry. He purchased the Eastern Tract in 1953. It passed to my father, and then to me. Silence. Brenda reached for the paper like a raccoon going for a shiny object. The fake lawyer tried to look busy adjusting his tie. And then I dropped the anchor. A signed and notarized clause in the deed showing no legal transfer had ever occurred to any HOA, because none had ever been properly formed. "Your so-called association," I said, "was never voted into existence. No 75% approval, no filings, no legal standing." The audience buzzed like a kicked beehive. That's when Judge Emmett Rose stood up from the side wall, his silver hair catching the fluorescence. "He's right," he said calmly. "I pulled the property covenants last night. Nothing authorizes an HOA to collect dues or enforce regulations without formal ratification. What you've got here, Miss Covington, is a fiction." Brenda's face went pale, like someone unplugged her from the only power source she ever respected. And then came the unraveling. Desperate to regain control, Brenda blurted out the one sentence that sealed her fate. "This is all just a delay tactic. I already told Canyon Ridge I had control of the properties." The room froze. "Canyon Ridge," someone repeated. I watched it click in real time. She hadn't just been enforcing rules. She'd been staging a sale, selling a community she didn't own. Claire gasped. Emmett turned to the fake lawyer. "Are you part of this sale?" The man grabbed his papers and backed toward the door. I was just contracted for today. I wasn't aware." And then he was gone, out the exit like a bad idea, finally realizing it didn't belong. Brenda's hands were trembling. "You don't understand," she said, voice breaking. "I was going to use the development money to fix everything, to raise values, to protect us from outside buyers." Her voice cracked on protect, like the word had finally given up on her. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The truth was laid bare across the folding table. Signed documents, certified stamps, receipts of unauthorized withdrawals, and her own words ringing in the room like a bell that couldn't be unrung. The same neighbors who once nodded politely while she fined them for mailbox colors and lawn lengths now stared with open disdain. Hank leaned over and muttered, "Turns out the only thing Brenda ever truly owned was the audacity." She stormed out, nearly tripping over the power strip as she went, flower print dress flapping like a defeated flag. No one followed. For the first time in years, nobody followed. The room turned not to her, but to each other, and for the first time in a long time, they talked like a neighborhood again. And as I stood there, folding up my documents, I looked out the window and saw the lake. Calm, honest, still. It didn't lie, it never had. But for years, folks had been told it belonged to rules written in shadows, enforced by fear, guarded by clipboards. Now they knew better. The land didn't need a queen. It needed caretakers. And we were about to start acting like one. You'd think after a dramatic HOA takedown, fake lawyer walkouts, and a community turning on its self-appointed queen, things would settle down. But peace isn't a switch. It's a process. Brenda vanished from public view almost overnight. Her newsletter dried up. Her clipboards disappeared. But the mess she left behind, that stuck around like glitter at a kid's birthday party. Confused residents, suspicious accounting, legal limbo over shared spaces. So I did what any guy with a deed to half a lake and a stack of certified paperwork would do. I called a meeting. This time everyone came. No shouting, no agendas printed in Comic Sans. Just neighbors sitting in folding chairs, talking like actual people. And for the first time, nobody opened with a threat. I laid out a simple offer. I'd transfer ownership of the shoreline, dock, and community spaces into a land trust, owned by the residents, managed by a transparent board, regulated by actual law instead of whoever held the glitter pen, but with conditions, I added, because freedom without structure is just chaos in costume. The room chuckled, explained that decisions would require a 75% majority, all expenses would be open book, and no one would hold unilateral power. Claire volunteered to help set up the bylaws, Hank offered to bring coffee and sarcasm, and Judge Emmett agreed to oversee the legal filings. We weren't just fixing a neighborhood. We were building something better from the rubble. And maybe, just maybe, we were healing too. A few days later, I got a visitor. Smooth guy, navy blazer, watch too expensive for a town this small. "Mr. Landry," he smiled, like I'd just won a prize I didn't enter. "Representing Canyon Ridge Ventures. We understand you're the primary stakeholder in the eastern tract of Willow Meadow. We'd like to offer $500,000, 0 cents, for your cabin and lakeside rights." I took the offer sheet, glanced at it, and handed it back without blinking. "You're about 3 zeros short," I said. He laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. "I'm not selling. In fact, I've already committed that land to a community trust." His smile flickered like a faulty light bulb. "We could structure you in as a partner," he said, switching tactics. 10% of development profits." I leaned back, studying him. "Tell Brenda I said no, again." The smile vanished for good. He left without shaking my hand. I locked the door behind him and updated my firewall. Later that week, news broke. Brenda had been charged with fraudulent misrepresentation and misuse of HOA funds. Plea deal, restitution plus community service. I almost didn't believe it until I saw her, wearing a county-issued orange vest, hair frizzed, sunglasses barely hiding the fury. She was picking up trash around the base of my maple tree. The very tree she once tried to sentence to death by bylaw. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Hank walked by with his dog and tipped his cap. "Brenda's finally serving the community," he said, "just not the way she planned." And me? I watered the wildflowers nearby, not saying a word. Because some victories don't need a mic drop. They just need time, patience, and good roots. That evening, as the sun settled behind the hills and painted the lake in gold, I got one final message. Anonymous email, generic sender. "You stopped us in Willow Meadow. You won't stop us at Lakeside Haven." A threat? A sequel? Who knows? I closed the laptop, poured a glass of bourbon, and sat on the porch. Let them come. I wasn't just protecting land anymore. I was protecting something bigger. A principle, a community, a tree that refused to fall. Brenda's clipboards were gone. Her gavel? Dust. And that red maple? Still standing. Still casting shade in the best way. Because roots don't run from clipboards, they grow around them. And sometimes the truth grows with them. You know, when I first bought that cabin, all I wanted was some quiet. A little deck to sip coffee on, a lake to stare at, maybe learn the names of a few birds. I didn't expect to inherit a battlefield. But sometimes, life hands you a clipboard with nothing on it, and it's up to you to write the truth. What started as a tree turned into a war over trust, power, and community. And while Brenda brought noise, control, and chaos, what finally won was patience, proof, and people waking up. I didn't win because I shouted the loudest or fought the dirtiest. I won because I asked the right questions, kept the receipts, and remembered that roots, real ones, don't move for noise. They anchor deeper. This story wasn't about me versus Brenda. It was about all of us realizing that authority only matters when it's honest, that leadership without accountability is just bullying in a blazer, that neighbors, when they speak up together, are louder than any gavel swing. So if you've ever faced down injustice, whether it came wrapped in a uniform, a title, or a clipboard, know this: you don't need to be loud to win. You just need to be clear, be steady, be rooted, and if you're lucky, you'll have a red maple of your own to remind you what's worth standing for. If this story meant something to you, if it fired you up, made you laugh, made you think, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Like this video if you've ever had to stand your ground. And hit that subscribe button, because we've got more wild, true-feeling stories coming, full of twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos. The next story, let's just say, the clipboard isn't done making enemies. Stay tuned.